Welcome, dear traveller. Tonight, let us journey together across the cold northern seas to a land whispered of in ancient Norse sagas. A place of quiet forests, starlit shores, and mysteries older than time. This is Vinland, the Whispering Shores, a relaxing bedtime story inspired by the legendary voyage of Leif Erikson and his discovery of a fertile land west of Greenland, believed to be part of modern-day Newfoundland. Let your mind drift with the tide as we explore peaceful groves, sleep beneath the stars, and uncover the gentle voice of a land that remembers. With soft storytelling and soothing sounds, this tale is crafted to help you unwind, release the day, and gently fall into a deep, restful sleep. So settle in. Close your eyes and let the wind carry you to Vinland. The sea was a mirror that morning, so still it seemed to reflect the very soul of the sky. A low mist rolled across the North Atlantic like a slow breath, weaving silver across the water's surface and blurring the horizon into a dream. The wooden hull of Leif Erikson's knoll creaked softly as it pushed forward, its wide-bellied frame parting the mist with reverent care. The sails hung loose in the gentle wind, whispering secrets as they filled and emptied, a rhythm older than any song. Leif stood alone at the bow of the ship, one hand resting on the carved dragon's head, the other wrapped around the grip of his father's old knife, a quiet heirloom, more for memory than for war. His eyes scanned the endless grey, not searching for land, but for something else. Something he could feel in his bones. A pull. A whisper. A compass of silence that did not point north, nor west, nor any direction known to men, but rather deep within the soul. His blonde hair was damp with ocean mist, his brow lined not from age, but from years of salt air, storms, and the weight of discovery. Around him, his crew moved like shadows, silent, patient, respectful of the hush that had fallen over them all. Even Thorvald, who could tell 100 stories in a single breath, had gone quiet. They had set out from Greenland days ago, leaving behind the frost-crusted mountains and sharp winds of their settlements, driven not by conquest nor coin, but by a story. A tale that had flickered in Leif's mind since childhood, fed to him in pieces by firelight. The tale of Bjarni Herjolfsson, the sailor who had once lost his way and glimpsed a land far to the west, lush, forested, free of ice. A land where the air tasted of honey and the wind smelled of growing things. A land that had neither name nor map. And so, Leif had followed the whisper. Not the voice of a man, nor of the gods, but something deeper. A silence that called out to him when the world grew still, like now. As the morning stretched on, the mist thickened, wrapping the world in gauze. Time became slow. Birds vanished. Even the waves seemed to fall into rhythm with Leif's heartbeat. His crew waited, each man unsure if they were sailing into legend or madness, or perhaps something beyond both. Then, from the mist, came a single cry, a seabird's sharp call, sudden and clear, cutting the silence like a bell. Leif lifted his eyes. There, above the mast, a white bird soared in slow circles. It called out again, once, twice, then turned and flew westward. He followed its path with his gaze until it vanished into the mist. "The land speaks," he whispered to himself. Then, louder, to the quiet ship, "Adjust our course. Follow the bird." The crew responded without question. Or shifted. The sail angled ever so slightly. The knot turned, following the vanishing trace of wings. No compass guided them. Only the silence. Only the call. Hours passed in that strange half-light. The sea never stirred. Leif stood unmoving, eyes open but distant, as if listening for something beyond sound. A story, maybe. A memory that hadn't happened yet. And then the fog began to lift. It was subtle at first, a dim light filtering through, softening the grey. Then, slowly, the mists parted like a curtain at a sacred rite, revealing a sliver of colour. Land! Not the jagged, ice-worn coast of Greenland, nor the black stone shores of Iceland, but a green line, low and lush, like a promise spoken in a dream. Behind it rose trees. Real trees. Tall, straight, and dense, cloaked in deep emerald leaves. A river mouth yawned nearby, spilling into the sea with a gentle murmur that reached them even from afar. The crew erupted in quiet awe. No cheers. No songs. Just a breath held in reverence. "Vinland," Leif murmured. He didn't know where the name came from, only that it rose in him like the tide. The land of vines. The land of wine. The land that waits. As they approached, the sea grew sweeter. The air turned soft and floral, as if they had crossed a boundary between worlds. Grapevines twisted lazily along the low hillsides. Wildflowers nodded in the breeze. And deeper inland, the forest stood like a sentinel, watchful and old. They anchored in the shallow bay just as the sun began to dip into the sea, casting the sky in hues of lavender and gold. Shadows stretched across the water. The forest darkened, but not ominously, more like it was closing its eyes to rest. Leif did not speak. He simply stepped off the boat and onto the sand, his boots pressing into soil untouched by his people. The land beneath his feet felt awake. Not in the way animals are awake. not even as the sea or wind, but in a deeper way, like the hush of a great hall just before a song begins. As if the earth here remembered things that had not yet come to pass. As if it knew Leif's name before he spoke it. He knelt and ran his fingers through the grass. It was damp, fragrant, and warm. A warmth that lingered like welcome. Behind him, the crew began to disembark. They moved slowly, reverently. No one laughed. No one shouted. They knew they had not simply discovered land. They had stepped into a story that had been waiting to be told. And somewhere in the trees, unseen yet deeply felt, the silence smiled. The fire crackled low that night, its amber glow painting flickers of gold on the bark of nearby trees. Leif sat cross-legged near the edge of the shore, watching the waves rise and fall in their gentle rhythm, as if the sea itself were breathing in sleep. Around him, the crew had begun to drift off, their blankets wrapped tight, their forms curled like children beneath the open sky. It was quiet now. Not silent, not truly. The world in Vinland hummed with a kind of sacred stillness, a hush alive with meaning. The trees whispered to each other in the breeze, and somewhere far off, a loon called across the dark water. But none of it disturbed the peace. It was the kind of sound the soul craved when all the day's burdens had been laid down. Leif tilted his head back and looked up. The sky above Vinland was nothing like the sky he had known over Greenland or the Norwegian fjords of his youth. Here, the stars were so many they seemed endless, woven across the night in dense clusters and shimmering threads, more than even the Skalds had dared describe in their tales. It was as if the gods had flung handfuls of silver dust across the heavens and said, "Let them dream." Leif didn't speak. There was no need. The sky said enough. The constellations were familiar, but brighter, sharper. And yet, there were patterns he didn't recognize, shapes between the stars, almost like runes etched by an invisible hand. He traced them with his eyes, wondering if they were omens, or simply gifts from a land that welcomed dreamers. Behind him, the forest loomed like a sleeping giant. But it was not threatening. No wolves cried out. No owls shrieked. It was as though even the wild things had agreed to leave this night in peace. Leif rose slowly and walked down to the edge of the water. His boots sank slightly into the cool, damp sand. The tide was gentle, brushing against the shore like a mother's hand. In the moonlight, the river nearby glowed pale silver, winding its way into the heart of the land like a ribbon of light. He bent to scoop up a handful of water, cupping it in his palms. It was clean, sweet, not brackish as he expected near the sea, but fresh and smooth, like mountain spring water. This land blesses everything it touches, he murmured to himself. And he felt, deep in his chest, that Vinland had not simply allowed them to arrive, it had invited them. That thought settled into him like warmth. He gazed back toward their little camp. The Nor, pulled slightly ashore, sat like a sleeping beast with its sail furled. The men, rugged and weather-worn, were still as stones. Some had propped themselves against logs, others sprawled in the grass, their weapons untouched. Even Thorvald, whose sleep usually came in short bursts, now breathed in long, restful waves. None of them had spoken of it aloud, but all had felt it. This place was different. Not merely fertile or beautiful, but aware. As if the land itself watched and chose when to reveal its gifts. Earlier that day, as they had explored the outer woods and meadows, they'd found vines tangled with fat purple grapes, hanging heavy and sweet. There had been wild wheat too, golden and soft beneath their fingers. They had gathered some for later, but not greedily. They had been careful, even gentle, as if plucking fruit from the branches of a sacred tree. No one had joked. No one had raised their voice. It was as if Vinland inspired reverence in the same way temples did. Leif turned and walked along the beach, his hand brushing the tall grasses that grew at the water's edge. The breeze carried the scent of pine and flowering herbs, and something else, something he couldn't name. It reminded him of old vellum pages from the sagas, warmed by firelight. Of snowmelt in spring. Of things lost, but not forgotten. There, a little way from the fire, he found a ring of stones nestled into the sand. They were smooth, all different shapes and sizes, but each seemed carefully placed. Not by the sea, he thought. Not random. He crouched down beside them, tracing a finger along one of the largest. It bore a shallow groove in its surface, curved and looping. A mark? No. A letter. A symbol. Not Norse. He leaned in closer, brushing sand away to reveal more faint carvings. These weren't recent. Time had softened their edges, but not erased them. Someone has been here before us. The thought didn't frighten him. Instead, it felt right. As if Vinland was a place remembered only by the land itself, revealed only to those who sought with open hearts. He sat beside the ring of stones for a while, letting the wind speak in his ears. He did not expect answers. This was not a place of answers. It was a place of quiet questions, of stories whispered between trees and carried by river currents. And as the stars turned slowly overhead, Leif finally lay down in the sand and closed his eyes. The world around him hummed softly, like the slow rhythm of an ancient drum. Vinland was not just land. It was a lullaby. Morning came softly to Vinland. It did not break with the harsh cry of gulls or the blinding light of sun through storm clouds. Instead, it arrived like a sigh through the trees, a quiet brightening of the world, as if the land itself stirred gently from slumber. The mist that had blanketed the camp during the night lifted in tendrils, curling through the trees and over the shoreline like forgotten dreams leaving the body. Leif Erikson stood at the edge of the forest, his boots damp with dew, his breath visible in the cool morning air. Behind him, the camp slowly came alive. Quiet greetings exchanged, a fire rekindled, the rustle of men preparing for another day of gentle exploration. But Leif's attention was elsewhere. The forest called. Not with sound, but with presence. Tall pines stood like sentinels, their trunks thick and straight, their tops swaying slowly in the high breeze. Beneath them, the underbrush was soft with moss and speckled with blue wild flowers that seemed to glow faintly in the dim morning light. It was a forest untouched, no felled trees, no scars of axe or fire. The air smelled of green things and secrets. Leif stepped forward. He passed beneath the first arch of trees, and immediately the sounds of the shoreline faded, muted like voices behind thick walls. All that remained was birdsong and the faint rustling of leaves overhead. Each footfall was cushioned by the forest floor, as if the earth itself offered him safe passage. The others would follow soon, Thorvald and Bjarni and a handful of trusted crew, but for now he walked alone. He moved carefully, as one might through a temple, his fingers trailing across bark, his eyes open to every shadow and shimmer. It felt less like he was entering the forest and more like he was being welcomed into it. And though the trees did not speak, he felt as if they were watching. Not with malice. Not even with curiosity. But with memory. As if they had seen others before him. And perhaps they had. As he ventured deeper, the canopy thickened. Dappled sunlight danced on the mossy ground, and the path before him, if it could be called a path, seemed to wind naturally, guided by roots and rocks and the gentle flow of a small stream that sang quietly beside him. Then he saw them. Marks. Symbols carved into the trees, faint, worn by wind and time, but unmistakably deliberate. Not runes. Not Norse. But elegant curves and lines, looping in ways that reminded him of song. He traced one with his fingertips. The bark was smooth and cool, the symbol older than memory, but still whole. Still alive. He stepped back and looked around. There were more. On trees. On flat stones half buried in the earth. In some places, vines had grown around them like protective arms, embracing the carvings rather than hiding them. This forest was not wild. It was remembering. He knelt beside a moss-covered rock and brushed away the green velvet coating. Beneath, he uncovered a pattern, spirals and circles, etched with care. He thought of the stone circle on the beach, of the way the land had seemed to whisper. Who had made these? And where had they gone? Perhaps they had left. Perhaps they had vanished like morning mist. Or perhaps they were still here, part of the wind, part of the trees, watching with a kindness older than time. From behind a tree, a deer stepped into the clearing. It moved without fear, its coat dappled with sunlight and shadow, its eyes deep and still. Leif held his breath. The deer blinked slowly, then dipped its head as if in greeting, and wandered off through the trees. He did not follow. Instead, he sat on a fallen log and closed his eyes. The forest thrummed around him, not with noise, but with presence. A gentle pressure in his chest. Not heavy. Not painful. Just full. Like the feeling of hearing a song you don't remember learning, but somehow know every word to. He breathed slowly, deeply, letting the scent of pine and earth and mystery fill his lungs. He thought of his father, Eric the Red, and the rough lands of Greenland. He thought of his people, their hunger for exploration, for stories, for land. But here, in this forest, none of that mattered. This was not a place to conquer. It was a place to listen. Eventually, the others found him. Thorvald stepped into the glade with wide eyes, his axe hanging loosely at his side. Bjarni followed, more cautious, whispering something under his breath as he took in the symbols carved in the trees. But none of them spoke aloud. They all felt it. The forest asked for silence. So together they sat, Leif and his companions, and let the wind tell its stories. And somewhere in the high branches a bird called out. Not in warning. Not in alarm. But like the end of a sentence. A punctuation to a moment that would live long in memory. Autumn drifted over Vinland like a soft woolen blanket, slow, quiet, and kind. The trees, once green and reaching, now turned to fire. Gold, copper, and deep wine-colored leaves fluttered gently down with each sigh of wind. The forest no longer whispered of mysteries as it had in the height of summer, but instead hummed with the soft lullaby of farewell. It was not a mourning, but a promise that life would sleep, not vanish. Leif stood beside a small grove of birch, watching the last few leaves spiral to the earth. He could smell the damp soil, rich and alive, even as the air grew crisper. The streams now carried a sharper chill in their current, and in the early morning, frost kissed the grass in delicate lace patterns that melted with the sun. Yet despite the cold's slow creep, there was no sense of threat. This land was preparing for rest, not retreat. And somehow, Leif thought, so are we. They had built modest shelters along the tree line, long houses woven with timber and earth, their thatched roofs heavy with moss. Smoke curled softly from holes in the top, and inside, warmth glowed from fire pits, gently warding off the gathering cold. The men adapted quickly. They hunted deer and caught fish, smoked meat and stored what grain they could. The vines had withered, and the forest fruits had faded, but Vinland had not left them wanting. It gave only what was needed. No more, no less. Some evenings, snowflakes drifted from the sky, soft and slow, vanishing before they touched the ground. The men would gather close, wrapped in fur and stories. No loud feasting, no raucous songs. Just quiet laughter, shared meals, and the deep comfort of being held by a land that seemed to breathe with them. And all around, the world began to sleep. Leif walked often through the forest paths, the ones now worn by foot and memory. He watched as the trees stood in silent dignity, bare and still. Even the birds had quieted, their songs replaced by the occasional rustle of unseen creatures preparing nests for the cold. On one such walk, he came to the river again. It was slower now, its song muted. Thin crusts of ice had formed at the edges, glinting in the moonlight. But it still moved, still carried the pulse of something ancient. He knelt beside it and dipped his hand into the water. It stung his skin with cold, but not cruelty. It was a reminder. Everything sleeps. Everything wakes. He looked up at the sky. Clear and sharp, the stars shone down in perfect stillness. The North Star flickered above, steady as a promise. And surrounding it, constellations old and new blinked quietly, keeping watch over those who had found their way west. Vinland did not speak in winter. It listened. And in that listening, it taught Leif and his crew more than words ever could. Each man found solitude, not loneliness. Reflection, not restlessness. Around the fire, they shared tales of childhood and dreams. Bjarni spoke of his father's lost map. Thorvald told a story about a spirit who lived in a glacier and taught him patience. Even the youngest among them, Eirik the cook, recited a lullaby his grandmother used to hum during dark northern nights. In the long, slow hush of winter, they were not Norsemen seeking conquest, not sailors chasing discovery. They were simply men, travelers, guests in a land older than their oldest songs. And Vinland, ever watchful, wrapped itself around them like snow upon pine, soft, silent, sure. One morning, Leif stepped outside before dawn. Frost clung to the earth, the grass sparkling under starlight. Breath clouded from his lips as he looked east, toward the ocean. There, low in the sky, the first silver thread of light began to stretch across the horizon. The days would begin to lengthen again. Slowly, quietly, but surely. The forest would wake. The river would swell. And the whispers of the land would rise once more. But for now, the winter slept. And the men of Vinland slept with it, wrapped in the quiet peace of a world between breaths, held by the mystery of a land that remembered, and the lullaby of time itself. Spring did not arrive all at once in Vinland. It stirred first in the smallest corners, beneath stones where moss began to green again, in the slow melt of frost from pine needles, in the softened earth that gave just slightly beneath a boot. There were no trumpets of blooming flowers, no thunderclap of renewal. Just the quiet breath of the land exhaling its long winter dream. And in that exhale came the time of farewell. Leif stood on the ridge above the shoreline, where the forest thinned and the sea once more stretched out in eternal blue. His eyes followed the waves as they curled gently toward the shore, and beyond, toward the cold horizon that would eventually lead them home. Their ship, faithful, worn, and well-mended, sat at the edge of the inlet, cradled in the arms of the sea. The hull had been repaired with Vinland's trees. The sail, patched with cloth traded among them through long winter evenings. Everything it carried now was part of this place. And so were they. It had been many moons since they'd first stepped onto this land, full of stories, uncertainty, and restless purpose. But the restless part of them had quieted here. The purpose had softened into presence. What they had found was not gold or conquest, but something gentler. Something older. In the forest, they had learned to listen. By the river, they had learned to feel. Beneath the stars, they had learned to remember. Still, the time had come. Not from any urgency, not from fear, but from the slow, certain voice that lives in the bones of all travelers. It is time to go. And so, on the morning of their departure, the men of the camp gathered around the place they had come to call the Heartstone. It was a smooth, flat rock nestled in a clearing just beyond the tree line. A stone that had become the center of quiet meetings, of stories and shared silences. No one could say exactly when it became sacred, but all of them had felt it. They had sat upon it in the sun, leaned against it in thought, laid offerings of berries, carved a rune or two into its side when no one was looking. It had listened to their laughter and held their secrets. Now it would become the farewell stone. Each man approached it in turn. No grand speeches, just simple gestures. A carved wooden bead, a braid of deer hide, a small feather, iridescent and blue. Leif placed a stone from Greenland, rough, dark, and cold to the touch, upon the flat surface. He whispered something too soft for others to hear. When they had all stepped back, the stone looked different. Not changed, but fuller, as if it had accepted their presence into its memory, as if it, too, would remember. That afternoon they pushed their ship into the water. The waves received them kindly, with no resistance. The wind rose just enough to carry the sail, and behind them Vinland watched. No storms chased them. No strange calls echoed from the forest. Only the sound of the sea, and the knowledge that they had been part of something larger than themselves. For many days the shore remained visible behind them, a green line against the silver edge of the world. Then it softened into mist, and then, like a dream upon waking, it was gone, but not lost. Not ever. Leif Erikson stood at the prow, hand resting on the carved dragon head of the ship, and closed his eyes. In his mind he heard the soft rustle of golden leaves, the hush of snowfall, the laughter of his men beside a winter fire, and beneath it all the whisper of stone beneath his palm, warm with memory. He opened his eyes to the wind. Home would welcome them. Stories would be told. Maps would be drawn. But no matter how the tale changed in retelling, he would always know the truth that lived in his chest like a soft, pulsing light. Vinland had not simply been found. Vinland had found them. And somewhere, in a forest that remembers and a stone that listens, their footsteps remained. Etched not in earth, but in the quiet song of the land itself. And so the sea rocked the ship gently, like a cradle, and the sky turned gold above them. And the land of whispering shores slept once more, holding its stories like treasures, waiting to speak again when the time was right.